Vermont, 1834, a winter morning when the world seemed heavy with silence. Snow pressed against rooftops, the kind of stillness that makes a man feel he is the only soul left alive. That was when neighbor Thomas Reed walked across the frozen fields toward the Blackwood farm. He expected to borrow a tool, perhaps share a word about the coming thaw, but instead, he found the front door of the farmhouse wide open, swinging slowly in the wind. No smoke from the chimney, no sound of animals, not even a trace of footprints in the snow, though the storm had ended hours before. Reed called out. No answer. He stepped inside. The kitchen fire had long gone cold. A pot of stew sat on the table, frozen solid. Plates laid out for a meal that was never eaten. It was as though the Blackwoods had vanished mid-breath, but they hadn't vanished. Not yet. He followed a draft into the barn. And there he stopped. His lantern light trembled as it struck the impossible scene before him. 7 bodies, each belonging to a member of the Blackwood family, lay arranged upon the dirt floor. Not in chaos, not in struggle, but in deliberate order. They were placed in perfect concentric circles, like markings of a ritual no one in town could name. The father, Elias Blackwood, at the outermost ring, his wife Margaret beside him. Then ring by ring the 5 children, youngest in the very center. Every face was calm, eyes closed as if sleeping. No signs of injury, no spilled blood, no overturned hay or shattered boards. It was as though death had come not with violence, but with purpose. Reed dropped the lantern. It rolled across the dirt, shadows flickering over pale faces that seemed almost peaceful. Too peaceful. For a moment he swore he saw the corners of one child's lips twitch upward, like the faintest suggestion of a smile. He staggered back into the snow, breath fogging in the cold, and ran until his legs failed him. By midday, the entire town of Lefferts Hollow had gathered at the Blackwood farm. Neighbors whispered, crossing themselves, refusing to step inside the barn. Some claimed the air around it felt heavy, pressing on the chest like a hand. When the minister arrived, he refused to pray over the bodies until they were moved. The doctor demanded to see signs of poison or disease. The sheriff, pale and sweating, muttered only one phrase again and again. This was arranged. This was made. No one could explain how the family died. No wounds, no illness, no trace of struggle. Only 7 bodies placed with geometric precision, circling something no one understood. The town was shaken to its core. Was this the work of madness, or was it something older, something that had marked the Blackwoods for reasons beyond human comprehension? Before I take you further into this story, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from tonight? A warm living room, perhaps? A quiet bedroom with the lights dimmed? Because when you hear what investigators uncovered next, you may feel the cold breath of Vermont itself seeping into your bones. And if this is your first time here, subscribe to Cold Mysteries. Every week we open doors that were meant to stay locked. And this one may be the darkest of them all. When the bodies were finally moved from the barn, something strange was noticed in the dirt beneath them. Faint chalk-like marks, as if circles had been drawn and then smudged away. But here is the detail that silenced the crowd that day. The innermost circle, where the youngest child lay, was burned into the earth itself. Not scratched, not drawn, burned, and no one, not even the doctor, could explain how. To understand the mystery of the barn, we must first understand the family who lay within it. The Blackwoods had lived on that stretch of Vermont farmland for nearly 2 generations. They were not strangers. They were not outcasts. Yet in the small town of Lefferts Hollow, whispers clung to their name like smoke to a chimney. Elias Blackwood, the father, was a man forged by 2 worlds. As a young soldier, he fought in the War of 1812, returning with scars across his chest and stories he rarely told. Some said he was brave. Others said he was marked by the things he had seen, and perhaps by the things he had done. By the 1830s, he had become a farmer of modest means, known for his strict discipline and odd habits. He would often spend long nights walking the property in silence, muttering scripture under his breath, stopping to draw shapes in the soil with the tip of his boot. Circles, one neighbor remarked. Always circles. Margaret, his wife, was remembered with softer tones. She was quiet, pale, with hands always red from washing, mending and cooking. But even she had her rumours. Townsfolk whispered she came from a line of women known for charms and cures, herbs that healed the sick, or so it was said. In a deeply Puritan town, such whispers were enough to brand her with suspicion. "Margaret Blackwood knows things she ought not to know," an old farmer once muttered at the tavern. And no one contradicted him. Their 5 children, ranging from 16 to just 5 years old, were seen less often. The older boys helped in the fields, rarely speaking. The younger girls were spotted in town, wide-eyed, shy, clinging to their mother's skirts. Yet even they stirred talk. One child, it was said, could recite long passages of scripture backward. Another, when scolded, would trace shapes into the dust of the floorboards. Shapes that made visiting neighbours uncomfortable, though they could not say why. The children were neither unruly nor cruel, yet something about them felt different. In Lefferts Hollow, difference was dangerous. Neighbours had long whispered of strange gatherings at the Blackwood farm. Faint lights glowing in the barn late at night, sounds of chanting carried across the frozen fields. Most dismissed it as foolish gossip. The Blackwoods were private folk, nothing more. But when 7 bodies were found in perfect circles, those old rumours were dragged back into the light. "We knew they weren't right," the minister declared. "The devil takes many shapes, even the shape of a good Christian family, yet not all agreed." Others argued the Blackwoods had been good neighbours, hard-working and God-fearing, that their silence was not secrecy, but humility. But in the minds of many, doubt had already taken root. The war-hardened father, the quiet mother with her herbs, the children tracing shapes, the lights in the barn, each detail that once seemed harmless now seemed sinister. And as the town wrestled with memory and fear, one question remained unspoken but unavoidable. Had the Blackwoods brought this fate upon themselves, or had something come for them? When investigators searched the farmhouse, they found something strange that would deepen these suspicions. A leather-bound book kept by Elias himself. It looked, at first, like an ordinary farm journal, notes on planting, weather, livestock. But as the pages wore on, the entries shifted. The script grew hurried. The words less coherent. He wrote of visions, of circles, of the geometry of God. And as the town would soon learn, the last pages contained not words, but drawings. Circles upon circles, ink pressed so hard into the page that the paper tore. The Blackwoods had lived as neighbours, farmers, fellow Christians. Yet even before their bodies were found, the seeds of suspicion had been planted. And when those seeds sprouted in the frozen ground of 1834, what grew was terror. When the sheriff finally ordered the bodies examined, the townspeople crowded outside the barn as if the air itself might carry an answer. Few dared enter, but those who did would never forget what they saw. The coroner, Dr. Charles Whitcomb, took notes by lantern light, his handwriting jagged, shaken. He would later confess to his wife that his hand had trembled so badly the ink ran across the page like spilled blood. Yet, what disturbed him most was not what he found, but what he could not. Each body was pale but intact. No bruises, no punctures, no broken bones. The lungs held no fluid, the stomachs no poison. The hearts had simply stopped. "It is as though life itself were plucked out of them," Dr. Whitcomb muttered to the sheriff, though he refused to repeat those words in court. The eldest son's body showed faint traces of ash across his scalp, though no fire had touched his hair. The youngest daughter's hands were curled, clutching at nothing, as though she had been holding something invisible at the moment of death. Whitcomb wrote in his notes, "There is no natural explanation, no physical sign of struggle or illness. They appear arranged post-mortem, and yet the calmness of the features suggests they lay down willingly. Measurements were taken. The placement of each body revealed geometric precision, equal distance apart, like points plotted on a compass. Not a single inch of variance. At the center of the innermost ring lay an open Bible, its cracked leather binding stiff with age. Yet the pages, every single one, were blank." The sheriff closed it quickly. as though afraid the absence of words might spread like a sickness. But the strongest testimony came not from the doctor, nor the sheriff, but from the animals themselves. Cows refused to enter the barn. Horses reared violently when led near. Dogs that normally guarded the farm whimpered and clawed at the snow, trying to pull free of their owners' grips. "They know," muttered one old woman, clutching her rosary so tightly her knuckles split. "They see what we cannot." Some claimed to hear faint noises when the barn was quiet. A low hum, too steady to be wind, too faint to be human. The sheriff dismissed it as nonsense, but several witnesses swore to it until their dying day. The people of Lefferts Hollow were left torn between silence and hysteria. Some urged swift burial, fearing contagion. Others demanded the barn be burned, salt poured on the ground to drive away whatever had taken root there. The minister declared it the work of the devil, citing Ezekiel's warning about false visions and sorcery. But a few, quieter, braver souls suggested the opposite, that Elias Blackwood had glimpsed something divine, that his circles were not blasphemy, but revelation. Whichever the truth, no one left the barn unchanged. One witness, a young farmhand, was said to have lost his senses entirely. He wandered into the forest days later, muttering, "The circles go on forever, forever," and was never seen again. By nightfall, the sheriff sealed the barn doors. The snow piled high against its sides, but still people gathered at a distance, staring as though the building itself had become alive. One man later wrote in his diary, "It looked less like a place of death and more like a mouth waiting to open again." And as the townspeople whispered in fear, one detail remained unsolved, haunting every conversation. If no one had killed the Blackwoods, why had they arranged themselves in such circles? And who, or what, had erased the words from the family's Bible? The barn became a monument that day, what's not of murder, but of mystery. And like all monuments, it began to draw pilgrims. Some came in fear, some in curiosity, and one stranger, in particular, would arrive to change everything. In the days that followed, the town of Lefferts Hollow found itself caught between fear and reason. The 7 bodies had been carried from the barn and laid in the small churchyard, yet the questions remained inside every villager's mind. How had they died? Why the circles? And who or what had arranged them? Dr. Charles Whitcomb, desperate to maintain a grip of science in a place overtaken by superstition, offered the first explanation. He told the townsfolk the Blackwoods must have suffered from poisoning, perhaps a tainted crop, or a chemical leached from the soil into their food. No man need summon devils when mold and poison are plentiful in the ground, he told the gathering at the tavern. But when pressed, he admitted his dissections had revealed no sign of toxin. The stomachs were empty. The bodies bore no swelling, no discoloration, no sign of sickness at all. The doctor's voice faltered. His explanation unraveled as quickly as it was spoken, and the crowd, hungry for certainty, turned elsewhere. Reverend Samuel Griggs stepped forward, his voice rising like a hammer. "This is no sickness of the body," he thundered from the pulpit. "This is sickness of the soul." Elias Blackwood led his family into a pact with darkness, and the devil himself laid them down in his mark. He pointed to the concentric circles, calling them symbols of sorcery. The blank Bible, he declared, was a sure sign that God had turned his face from the family. Many nodded, others trembled, and a few looked at their own children in fear, wondering what other families might be marked next. But in the corners of the tavern and along the edges of the snowy fields, another theory took root, one that reached further back than either doctor or minister. The land on which the Blackwoods farmed, it was whispered, had once belonged to the Abenaki. A native elder had warned long ago that blood spilled on that ground would never rest. Some recalled a story of a settler murdered there decades earlier, his body left in a ring of stones. Others swore they had seen strange fires on the ridges in summers past. "It is not sickness," muttered one farmer, "and it is not Satan, it is the land itself, taking back what was stolen." The sheriff dismissed such talk as superstition. but he too avoided walking past the farm alone at night. The explanations divided Lefferts Hollow. Some clung to science, others to scripture, and still others to the older whispers of curses. At the heart of the division was one question none dared voice aloud. What if none of these explanations were enough? What if the Blackwoods' deaths were not just an event, but a message? And though the bodies lay cold, the mystery burned hotter than ever. Children were kept indoors. Women carried charms or crosses. Men gathered in small groups, rifles slung over shoulders, pretending they were not afraid. Yet, the fear only deepened when the investigators returned to the farmhouse and discovered Elias Blackwood's journal, a journal that seemed to confirm every side of the debate at once. The early entries were plain, describing harvests, debts, and the weather. But gradually they shifted. The handwriting grew frantic. Circles appeared in the margins, then diagrams of wheels and spirals. The circle is the perfect shape, Elias wrote. It binds beginning and end. It binds God to man. If we lay ourselves in it, he will know us. The last words were barely legible. Ink smeared and paper torn. The geometry of God cannot be denied. The journal was shown to the doctor, the minister, and the sheriff. Each saw in it proof of their own beliefs. To the doctor, it was madness. To the minister, blasphemy. To the sheriff, evidence of something deliberate. But to the townsfolk, it was something far worse, a prophecy. The town of Lefferts Hollow could not agree on what killed the Blackwoods, but everyone agreed on one thing, Sawaki. Whatever it was, it would not stop with them. And then a stranger arrived. And with him, the story of the Blackwoods twisted into something even darker. When Elias Blackwood's leather-bound journal was carried into town, it became more than evidence. It became obsession. For within its weathered pages lay the mind of the man who had led his family into the circle of death. At first, the writing was ordinary. A farmer's ledger. Dates of planting, the yield of corn, the health of cattle, notes about neighbors. Nothing strange, nothing sinister. But then the tone shifted, and once it shifted, it never returned. The entries became longer, written at odd hours. Candle wax burned into the corners of pages. Sentences grew tangled. The nights are longer now, he wrote one January. The stars align into rings. I feel them moving beneath the soil, pulling us closer to the center. Another entry. The children laugh in their sleep. They dream together. They dream the same dreams. They see the circle too. Neighbors remembered Elias as a stern man, not given to flights of fancy. Yet, here was his hand, confessing thoughts no farmer should hold. By spring, the journal was consumed with diagrams, rings within rings, overlapping like ripples on a pond. He called them the geometry of God. One chilling entry read, "The minister says salvation comes through words, but he is wrong. God speaks in circles. He has always spoken in circles. We must place ourselves where he can see us." At first, the sheriff dismissed it as the ramblings of a man losing his grip. But Dr. Whitcomb pointed out that the measurements of the drawn circles matched precisely the arrangement of the Blackwoods' bodies in the barn. Elias had not simply imagined the geometry, he had planned it. The entries about the children were the most disturbing. Elias wrote, "The little one smiles when she lies in the center. She says she feels warm, though the fire is not lit. She says someone holds her hand when she closes her eyes. We cannot see him, but she can." Another note, "The boy does not fear the circle. He walks it every morning, tracing the steps with bare feet, even when frost cuts his skin. He does not bleed." The town recoiled. The minister claimed it was proof Elias had drawn his children into sin. Others whispered that perhaps the children had led him. The last pages of the journal were unreadable, whole lines scrawled over with ink, circles drawn until the paper tore. One fragment of a sentence survived. When the seventh lies down, the circle will close, and then nothing. Only blank pages. It mirrored the black Bible found in the barn. Two books once filled with words, silenced by emptiness. The journal split the town further. To the doctor, it was madness, perhaps an early sign of a condition no one yet understood. He warned that obsession could rot the mind as surely as disease rots the body. To the minister, it was proof of heresy, a man rewriting the language of God into blasphemous shapes. He declared the journal a temptation and ordered it locked away in the church. But others whispered another theory. What if Elias had not invented the circles but discovered them? What if his writings were not delusion but revelation? The idea took root, and once it did, it spread like frost across the hollow. Days later, as the town argued over the meaning of Elias Blackwood's words, a stranger appeared, thin, pale, with eyes that seemed to measure everything he saw. He asked for the journal. He claimed to understand it, and from the moment he set foot in Lefferts Hollow, the story darkened. Lefferts Hollow was already a town divided when he arrived. The Blackwoods lay buried, their barn shuttered, their journal locked away. But the questions remained, unresolved, festering. And then a stranger walked into town. No one knew his name, no one asked. He appeared in the last week of March, when the snows began to soften and the earth broke open in dark, muddy streaks. He came on foot, thin as a shadow, his clothes plain but clean, his manner neither humble nor proud. What unsettled people most were his eyes, grey, watchful, unblinking, as though he were measuring every man, woman, and child he passed. He asked not about lodging, nor food, nor work. His first question, spoken at the tavern, was, "Where is the book?" The men at the table exchanged uneasy glances. One asked what book he meant. The stranger replied, "The one with the circles. The one Elias wrote." No one admitted to knowing, but word spread quickly, and by nightfall everyone in Lefferts Hollow knew the stranger had come looking for Elias Blackwood's journal. He stayed in the corner of the tavern, eating little, speaking less. He never gave a name. Children who peeked through the window swore he sat motionless for hours, eyes fixed on the flames of the hearth, lips moving silently as though in prayer or calculation. One night, a farmer's wife claimed she heard him humming outside her window, a low, steady sound. She thought it was the wind until she realized the hum rose and fell in perfect intervals, like a chant. When men confronted him, asking why he had come, he answered with a phrase that chilled the blood. The circle was not completed. "There will be another," Reverend Griggs met with him once. The meeting lasted less than an hour, but the minister emerged pale, his hands shaking. When asked what the stranger had said, he would not repeat it. Only once did he hint at it, muttering during a sermon, "There are those who believe geometry can replace God. Beware them. They speak with voices not their own." The congregation shifted uneasily, for everyone knew who he meant. But it was the children of Lefferts Hollow who seemed most drawn to him. They followed him at a distance, watching as he walked the edges of fields, stopping often to draw shapes in the soil with a stick. Circles, always circles. One boy later swore that the stranger bent down and whispered to him, asking if he had seen the rings in his dreams. The boy did not answer. He ran home sobbing, refusing to sleep for 3 nights. Theories about him spread quickly. Some said he was a scholar from Boston sent to study the phenomenon. Others claimed he was a drifter feeding on the town's fear. A few whispered he was no man at all, but a demon wearing a man's face, a collector of souls left unclaimed by the devil. The sheriff warned him to leave. The stranger smiled, the only time anyone remembered seeing him smile, and answered, "When the second circle is drawn, you will beg me to stay." That night, more than one family packed their belongings and fled the hollow, never to return. The stranger never explained who he was nor why he came. He spoke little, but when he did, his words lodged in the mind like splinters. The journal, the circles, the promise of another. And while the town grew restless, whispering about curses and demons, something darker was about to unfold, for the stranger's words would soon prove true. The Blackwood Circle was not the end, it was only the beginning. The town's fear might have burned itself out in whispers, but word of the Blackwood deaths did not remain in Lefferts Hollow. By midsummer of 1834, the case had reached Boston, and with Boston came men of science, eager to explain what scripture and superstition could not. 3 men arrived, each with instruments and notebooks. Dr. Lemuel Carter, a physician, Professor Alcott, a mathematician, and Mr. Henry Dyer, a surveyor. They announced their mission proudly to put an end to the hysteria by the light of reason. Their first task was the barn itself. Though the bodies had been removed, the straw still bore impressions. The scientists measured distances, angles, placement. The results stunned even them. Each Blackwood body had been arranged at precise intervals. Not roughly, not approximately, but exact. The rings were nearly flawless, with spacing accurate to within a fraction of an inch. Professor Alcott declared that no ordinary man could have achieved such geometry without instruments, compasses, or surveying tools. But Elias Blackwood's farm had none. The only tool found near the barn was a simple stick, worn smooth at the tip, as though used to trace lines again and again. When shown Elias's journal, Alcott grew pale. He compared the drawings to the measurements of the barn and found them identical. He plotted this, the professor whispered, but he could not have done so unaided. The proportions suggest knowledge of higher geometry, knowledge far beyond what a farmer could possess. The minister called it evidence of demonic influence. The doctor scoffed at such claims, but in his private notes, Alcott scribbled one phrase again and again. The man understood something he should not have understood. By late summer, with fear still gripping the town, the scientists petitioned to exhume the Blackwood bodies. Against the protests of grieving neighbors, the sheriff agreed. One by one, the coffins were lifted. But when opened, another horror revealed itself. The bodies showed no decay. Months had passed, yet the skin was intact, the features preserved, as though the family had only just lain down to sleep. No rot, no odor, only a faint, sweet smell of ash. Dr. Carter searched for explanations. Soil composition, mineral content, air quality, none sufficed. Preservation was unnatural. Whispers spread quickly. The townsfolk said the circle had not let them rot, that they were trapped, neither alive nor truly dead. The men of Boston returned to the tavern, pale and shaken. They offered theories, each weaker than the last. Some blamed arsenic in the soil, others rare mineral salts. But, privately, they admitted none of it held. Professor Alcott confided to the sheriff in a hushed voice, "I fear we have measured something not meant to be measured. Geometry does not belong to us alone." The sheriff later confessed that he wished he had never heard those words. But the greatest unease came not from the scientists, but from the stranger who lingered still. He appeared one evening at the edge of the churchyard, watching as the bodies were lowered back into their graves. Someone asked what he saw. His reply was simple: not graves, only waiting places. That night, 2 men swore they saw him walking in the fields, drawing circles in the dirt, with a lantern swinging at his side. In the morning, rings of burned grass were found, as though fire had crawled in perfect paths along the ground. The sheriff ordered the stranger driven out. But by then, it was already too late. The scientists failed. The doctor failed. The minister failed. No explanation could cage the terror. And then the circle seemed to spread. Dreams began to haunt the town. Children woke screaming of rings of fire. Farmers found their fields marked with shapes no plough had carved. And the people of Lefferts Hollow began to ask the question they had most dreaded. What if the Blackwoods were not victims at all, but the first participants in something larger? The Blackwoods were buried. The barn stood locked. The men of science had returned to Boston in failure. And yet, the mystery did not end with the family's death. It began to spread. Like ripples in water, the circles widened, touching every corner of Lefferts Hollow. It started with the children. At first, harmless sleep-talking, little more than murmurs. But soon their words were heard clearly. The circle is warm. The circle is light. The circle goes on forever. Parents woke in terror to find their children sitting upright in bed, eyes wide, tracing shapes in the air with their fingers. When shaken, they did not respond at first. They only whispered, "7 is not enough." Soon, even grown men and women began to dream. They saw the barn. They saw Elias Blackwood's journal. They saw themselves lying down in perfect rings, their bodies falling into place as if pulled by some unseen force. Sleep became a terror. greater than waking life. By midsummer, strange markings appeared across the town. Farmers found circles scorched into their fields overnight, their wheat bent but not burned, as though pressed down by invisible hands. One woman discovered rings of ash on her doorstep, perfectly drawn, though no fire had touched her home. And then came the most unsettling of all. Families awoke to find dirt traced into rings around their beds.
No footprints, no sign of entry.
Just silent, perfect circles enclosing their sleep. "The circle chooses," whispered one terrified farmer. "It knows where to find us." Panic turned to horror when a boy of 8 vanished from his home. His parents swore he had gone to bed with the rest of the family. Yet, when they woke, his blankets were neatly folded, his shoes placed by the bed, and he was gone. For 3 days, the town searched. On the 4th morning, he was found wandering the fields, barefoot, his nightshirt torn. He carried no memory of where he had been, but his hands were black with ash. And on his palms, faint but visible, were circular marks as though burned into the skin. The minister declared it the devil's work. The doctor declared it a fit of madness. But the sheriff only said, "The boy has walked where we dare not." The stranger, who had never left, spoke more boldly now. He told the townsfolk the Blackwoods had been chosen, and that their deaths were not an end but a beginning. "The circle is never finished," he said.
"It grows. It takes more."
It always takes more. Some tried to silence him. Others listened with a mix of fear and fascination, and a few began to believe. Whispers spread that the stranger himself was guiding the circles, that he alone knew the meaning of Elias Blackwood's drawings. And though no one dared say it aloud, more than one villager wondered if perhaps he was right. Fear strangled the hollow. Doors were bolted at dusk, windows nailed shut, families gathered in single rooms, sleeping in shifts, watching each other through the night. But the circles still came, drawn in flour spilled on kitchen floors, scratched into the frost on window panes, burned into the grass behind barns. One old woman fell to her knees and begged the minister to burn the journal to end the curse. But when the book was retrieved from the church, the last pages were no longer blank. Circles had appeared where there had been none before. By autumn, Lefferts Hollow was no longer a town of farmers and families. It was a town of watchers, of whisperers, of sleepless men and hollow-eyed children. The fear had become a contagion, and soon it would consume not just their minds, but the town itself. For the leaders of Lefferts Hollow made a desperate decision, one that would seal the Blackwoods' fate forever, and silence the truth for generations. By the autumn of 1834, Lefferts Hollow was unraveling. Families whispered of leaving. Farmers abandoned their fields at night, refusing to tend cattle near the Blackwood barn. Children woke screaming, their parents too afraid to ask what they had seen in their dreams. The town had reached its breaking point, and so its leaders, the sheriff, the minister, and the wealthiest landowners, gathered one night in the tavern's back room. Their decision was swift, unanimous, and born of desperation. The Blackwood story would be buried, not just the bodies, but the truth itself. The first act was destruction. On a moonless night, men crept to the edge of the Blackwood farm. With lanterns and pitch, they set fire to the barn. Witnesses described the blaze rising unnaturally fast, as though the old wood had been waiting for flame. The smoke rose in twisting spirals, curling into the sky in shapes too precise to be chance. One boy, who watched from a distance, swore he saw rings of fire lift into the air before fading into ash. The minister dismissed it as childish fear, but the memory followed the boy into adulthood, where he told it with the same trembling voice until his final days. By morning, the barn was gone. Only a blackened foundation remained, a scar upon the earth where the circle had once been. Next came the journal. The minister declared it a work of evil, insisting it be burned alongside the barn, but the sheriff argued it should be preserved, locked away in case the truth one day mattered. In the end, compromise was reached. Most of The journal was consigned to flames, its pages curling into smoke, but a handful of leaves, torn out before the fire, survived. Who kept them? No one knew. Some said the sheriff held them in secret. Others claimed the stranger took them before vanishing from the hollow. Either way, those fragments would resurface in whispered accounts decades later, proof that the circle's story had never truly died. The Blackwood family was buried quickly, quietly in the farthest corner of the churchyard. No markers, no ceremony, no prayers, only mounds of earth pressed flat by fearful hands. The minister warned his congregation not to speak their names aloud, claiming that words gave power to the dead, yet the people of Lefferts Hollow whispered anyway. In kitchens, in fields, in the shadows of the tavern, they spoke of Elias and his circles. Not in reverence, not in grief, but in fear. The final act of suppression came from beyond the town itself. The sheriff wrote to Boston requesting the scientists' reports be sealed, their findings kept from publication. In time, the documents vanished. Some claimed they were destroyed, others believed they still lay hidden in archives, mislabeled, forgotten, waiting to be found. Whatever the case, the official record of the Blackwoods' death dwindled to almost nothing. Just a footnote in county papers. 7 dead in Lefferts Hollow, cause unknown. But the people who lived there knew, and they carried that knowledge in silence. For years after, no one built upon the Blackwood land. Grass grew high where the barn had stood. The farmhouse collapsed under snow and time. Hunters avoided the place. Children dared one another to run across the fields at night, few ever making it past the fence. And through it all, the silence remained. The kind of silence that does not soothe, but waits. The town leaders congratulated themselves. They believed they had ended it, that by burning, burying, and forgetting, they had smothered the circle's power. But whispers have a way of surviving, and the circles, they always return. The Blackwoods were gone. The barn was ash. The journal scattered to fire and secrecy. But Lefferts Hollow would never again be the same, because the people had learned. Something no town should ever know. Some mysteries do not end. They only sleep. Nearly 2 centuries have passed since the winter morning, when Thomas Reed opened the door to the Blackwood barn and stumbled into a mystery that has never been solved. The barn is long gone. The farmhouse collapsed into the earth. The graves lie unmarked in the far corner of the churchyard. And yet the story of the Blackwood family has never left Vermont. It lingers in folklore, in whispers, in the uneasy silence of fields where no crops will grow. In the late 1800s, nearly 50 years after the tragedy, amateur historians revisited the case. They found the record suspiciously thin. County papers mentioned the deaths only briefly. The scientists' reports were missing. The sheriff's notes had vanished, but they uncovered fragments, letters from townsfolk, diary entries, and half-burned pages of Elias Blackwood's journal. The fragments revealed what the town had tried to erase: precise drawings of circles, numbers scrawled in margins, and cryptic phrases such as "7 is not the end" and "the center is always waiting." The historians left unsettled. One wrote privately, "I came seeking facts. I leave with the suspicion that facts are not enough." In the decades that followed, the Blackwoods became legend. Children dared each other to walk the fields at night, swearing they could see faint rings glowing in the grass. Old farmers warned against plowing too close to the ruins, claiming animals sickened there, and some families, passing the story down through generations, claimed the circles never left their dreams. They spoke of nights when they woke to find ash at their windowsills, arranged in perfect rings. The tale became part of Vermont's darker folklore, not spoken loudly, but always present, like a shadow just beyond the firelight. Modern scholars have proposed many explanations. Some claim it was ergot poisoning, a fungus in rye grain that can cause hallucinations, convulsions, even death. Others suggest carbon monoxide from smoldering fires suffocating the family quietly in their sleep. But these explanations falter against the evidence: the geometric precision, the blank Bible, the preservation of the bodies. Then there are those who dismiss natural theories entirely. They see the Blackwood deaths as ritual. Either the families
Own, born of Elias's obsession with circles, or something darker imposed upon them.
One folklorist wrote, "We call it madness because it comforts us. But perhaps Elias Blackwood was not insane. Perhaps he saw something we cannot, or will not, admit exists. The stranger who haunted the town that spring was never seen again. No name, no trace, no record. Yet his words linger. The circle was not completed. There will be another." To this day, unexplained reports surface in Vermont. Rings of scorched grass, children whispering of circles in dreams, families finding shapes traced in ash across their porches. Coincidence? Trick of nature? Or the widening ripples of a circle first drawn nearly 2 centuries ago? The Blackwood family has become more than a mystery. They are a warning. A reminder that death does not always come with wounds, nor madness with shouting. Sometimes it comes quietly in the form of patterns too perfect to ignore. 7 bodies lay in perfect circles. The Bible was blank. The journals spoke of geometry no farmer should know. And in the silence of Lefferts Hollow, one truth remains. The circle was never broken. It waits still. If you've made it this far into the shadows, I'll ask you 2 things. First, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Second, subscribe to Cold Mysteries, because every week we open doors history. Tried to lock. Doors that lead to places where silence is heavy and answers are never enough. And remember, some doors, once opened, never close again. Neither do circles.